Welcome to another edition of Seahawks Forever. I am Dan. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk running backs today, specifically how good is this young, deep, and cheap Seahawks running back room. Casey McLain of the Poor Sports podcast is going to join me. Always love how he's able to articulate his thoughts. He's a very passionate and analytical brain when it comes to his Seattle Seahawks. Also a funny guy. You may have seen him on a local comedy stage near you. But Casey's going to join me today. We're going to talk about the Seahawks running back room. Is it the best of its kind in the league? That's up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
If you want to support the channel, the easiest and best thing to do, and it's completely free, is hit that like button and then subscribe to the channel if you don't already. And if you hit that bell button, you'll get notified anytime I post new material. If you want to donate to the cause, though, as I am a full-time content creator, all the different ways you can do that are linked down below in the description. So I've known Casey for a couple years now. I think he was the first one to reach out to me on Twitter. He liked watching my show, and then I kind of saw some of the content he did. And once we did our first show together, we just clicked. And he's a real easy guy to make conversation with, especially when it comes to football. In fact, when we were done recording this episode, we talked for another 20 minutes off air about stuff. So also stay tuned until the end. A very big announcement for me personally and for the channel about some new content, different content, non-Seahawks content coming your way this Friday. We'll get Casey's comments on that as well. So stick around for that. But until then, this is Casey and I talking about the Seahawks running back room. Enjoy. Well, Casey, it's good to have you back on the show. And thanks for your patience. I have been living in the East Coast time zone now for like 2.5 weeks, and I still can't get it. So the good news is I was all ready to go, had graphics built, had my notes written and everything at 1 o'clock today, which was 10 o'clock for you, and you weren't ready yet. And why would you be? Because we had agreed on 1 o'clock Pacific time. So thanks for bearing with me.
Yeah, absolutely. You did. My blood pressure went up for a minute. I felt like I forgot an appointment. And But, you know, if I have cardiac arrest on this podcast, it's you to blame. But otherwise, we're good.
Because the way Casey found out is me sending him the StreamYard link. Like, hey, see you in a half an hour.
Yeah. I was checking my calendar, checking our messages, panicking. Yeah.
We haven't talked since before the draft on your show, and that was a lot of fun. And it's always fun to then come out on the other side, right?
We did talk during the draft, if you recall.
Yeah, actually.
I joined you from a liquor store parking lot.
That's right. Well, you were driving to Portland to do a show. That's right. And then it takes us a while to get used to the fact that, like, wow, these guys are really Seahawks. Like, we run all the scenarios and everything else. And we're going to talk about running backs today. So let's kind of start at the end and work backwards. Like, I had been saying leading up to the draft, and we probably talked about this on your show a little bit, they were going to take one at some point. Mm-hmm. I actually thought it would be a little bit earlier in the draft just because it's such a strong class. But because of that, it pushed some guys down the boards. There were even some guys not drafted that I think could end up being starters in this league. And certainly the Seahawks got one of those, I believe, in Damian Martinez, who was one of my favorite running backs throughout the entire process. Your thoughts on that pick and just kind of how he fits into what you think Clint Kubiak and Mike McDonald are going to try to do?
Yeah, I like Damian Martinez fine. I would say I'm a little bit of a running back skeptic overall, like that you need to take one super early. So Damian Martinez fits everything I want out of a running back for sure. I like that they're just going to continue to keep filling the pipeline so they don't have to overpay a guy. So my love for Damian Martinez may be limited, but my love for the philosophy of taking a Damian Martinez every year is pretty strong.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the group as a whole and how it fits in the league and is it the best running back room in the league? Like that's kind of the question that I'm putting out there, and the parameters. And obviously, I'm shaping this to my narrative, right? I'll be accused of that for sure. But when you look at age, you look at cap hit, you look at production, and you look at upside, I really don't think there's another running back room in the league that comes close. And we're talking about 5 guys here, and we'll get into those in just a moment. But just your thoughts generally on the state of the running back room, because it wasn't that long ago Like time flies, but it wasn't that. Was it 2019 when Marshawn Lynch had to get off the couch to come help us in a playoff run at the end of the season? Because all those guys, they drop like flies. The durability of that position is certainly an issue and something that's been a topic of debate for years. But how do you feel about the group as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly I like Kenneth Walker. I think he's got a lot of upside in this system. I like Zach Charbonnet just fine. I might be a little bit behind you on thinking it's the best in the league, especially because do you think they're going to carry? And we've talked enough at this point. You know, I'm a little obsessed with the fringes of the roster and how many they can actually carry at each position. Man. Yeah, so they have 5 guys in the room.
Right.
How many of do you think? I mean, it seems impossible to me that Martinez and Helani are both, or that McIntosh, Martinez, and Helani are all going to be on the roster. So for me, I was thinking about it like the top 3 or 4 in that room.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's as much depth. I mean, 1 through 5, I think all 5 of those guys could theoretically be starters on this team next year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or somewhere.
Sure.
And that's, I'm glad you brought that up because it does lend context to the discussion. They typically only carry 3, and that's always kind of surprised and frustrated me. I see other teams where they do carry 4 or 5. And, as a fantasy football lover, like you get halfway into the season and sometimes there's these deep sleepers and kind of under the radar guys because some team will get racked by injuries and they have a 4th guy just ready to go, not even on the practice squad, but on the 53. The Seahawks have never done that. But I think the way that they intend to operate the offense this year, I mean, look at the tendencies and what Clint Kubiak likes to do. I think they carry 4, and that's even knowing that they're going to carry a fullback also. He likes to run 2 backs and not just a fullback and a running back. He'll run some 2 tailback stuff. I think we'll see Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, for example, on the field together. We may see Kenneth Walker and Damian Martinez if he picks things up quickly enough. And so for sure, all 5 of these guys aren't going to make it. Now, does George Helani maybe get to the practice squad? Maybe even Kenny McIntosh if he ends up getting released? Absolutely, because we are coming out of a draft where it was such a deep and talented group. Those are both guys. Well, not necessarily Helani, but McIntosh is a guy that ran a 4.6 at the combine. Like he may be one of those players that looks better to the team that just had him than he does to the rest of the league, if that makes sense. And so I think that is important context here. They're not going to carry 5, certainly. But when I started looking through depth charts around the rest of the league, like there's some teams that don't have a good 3. And so I think that's kind of where I want to compare it a little bit. If the question then is like, where are you going to take that roster spot from? Well, they're not going to carry 7 wide receivers like they sometimes have on the 53, the initial 53. I don't even think they'll carry 6 because they don't run 3 wide receiver sets as often.
Yeah.
Clint Kubiak doesn't. And we probably have to make room for maybe another tight end too. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion as we get down to the final 53.
Yeah, I think about it because I think they're probably going to carry an extra running back. I think you're right. They're going to carry an extra fullback, or they're going to carry a fullback. They're going to carry another, let's say, half a tight end. Maybe they use that fullback in the tight end depth chart.
I think it's possible that Oates, I haven't gotten that down yet. And Russell both make the team, with Russell being like a hybrid. He can basically take up a half a position each. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're also going to have, they're going to probably carry 3 quarterbacks for the first time in a long time. And so you start to go like 4 or 5 of these extra roster spots have now been devoted to the offense. And that's also an offensive line that's got an Abraham Lucas you might be worried about potentially, and a defensive line that's got, some like aging dudes on it. And yeah, that's I would say that's my only concern around, that's the source of my anxiety around the roster construction, is just where is the injury going to be, and are you going to have some redundancy for that person? And it's harder when you start to carry 4, potentially 5 running backs, and also 4 tight ends, and also 3 quarterbacks.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
And where are you going to rob that from? And
Yeah.
that's where versatility comes into play. I think it's gonna place a premium. Obviously, performance in the preseason and throughout training camp is going to matter. But if you're an offensive lineman, you can only play one spot. Like, you might be in trouble if you're on the bubble. Like, you got to be able to cross train. You got to be able to play guard and center probably, or tackle and guard to make this squad. Maybe they go with one fewer offensive lineman than they typically do. Maybe one fewer edge player. They carried 5 typically, but how much did we see last year out of Travis Gibson? Like, he was active a lot of the times, but he never played, or he was a healthy scratch on game day. A Nick Emenwari in the role that they envision him in, playing more in the box, kind of playing weak side linebacker sometimes. Does that alleviate the need to carry another linebacker, because he's kind of a hybrid guy? Same with some of the safeties and corners they have. So yeah, that'll certainly be a point of discussion. You can't just load up all 3 of those positions on offense, because where are you going to take them from? So, but it's a good problem to have if you're cutting guys. They're good, right? I think Kenny McIntosh might be the best example of what we're talking about here, because, we saw, man, he came out of the gates that rookie year. He was just blowing it up in training camp. And then we get to the mock game and he hurts himself, and it doesn't look like that serious of an injury, no surgery required, but it costs him basically a redshirt year as a rookie. And then we don't really get running back. Didn't even go to a second running back often enough, in my opinion. But then we finally got to see it those last 5 games of the year. We really saw what Kenny McIntosh can do. But let's get back to Ken Walker, because I think he's in the last year of his deal, and that, I think, precipitated, just as you mentioned, that's why you take it, Damian Martinez. Let's work ahead from this instead of being behind it.
Yeah.
The issue with him has been health. He just hasn't been able to play 17 games. If he does, like, how good do you think he can be?
Well, I mean, this is one thing I will say is, to be true to myself a little bit, is I think there's a question with running backs, how much of the production comes from talent versus scheme and execution, right? And I think that scheme for running backs is probably the largest portion of it. And this scheme just got a lot better for those running backs, is my suspicion. Like, I think that I think Clint Kubiak is going to have productive running backs no matter where he's at, probably. And I think Kenneth Walker could, if he was a feature back, like a 1990s feature back, he's a 1,500 yard, 12 touchdown guy potential, like upside. And it's all I think it's all predicated on his health. I'm with you completely. I think he's got top end running back, like, top 3rd running back potential. And it's just a question of how many snaps is he going to be able to take this year? How many carries is he going to be able to take? How many games is he going to be active for? And if it's 17, I mean, I think that there's a chance that the Seahawks could be, unfortunately, you almost don't want him to, this is my skepticism of running backs, I almost don't want him to do that well, because I don't want the Seahawks to be lured into overpaying a running back in the offseason.
Well, we'll get into that in a second. But yeah,
so I didn't mean to jump topics.
It's the thing with Walker. What concerns you most? If you had to pick one, is it the durability issues? And he always seems to get hurt early in the season too. He always gets a setback, it seems like, early in the season. Is it that, or is it that propensity that he has no matter what's going on? And I know we can talk about offensive line and lack of running lanes over the last couple of years, last year in particular. Is it that the fact that still going into his 4th year in the league, he still wants to bounce everything outside?
Well, I think that's the one thing about that is, I do think he has that problem. I agree with you. I think that being in Kubiak's system that'll be rewarded a little more than it has been in previous systems like that. It's
designed to go outside.
Right. And it's one of those things where if a guy breaks off a big run, they call it patience. And if he gets stopped behind the line of scrimmage, they call it indecisiveness. And I think that the scheme might make that flaw, that I do agree is a flaw in his game, that I would like to see a guy his size and with his athletic traits go north and south a lot earlier. But again, that's what I'm saying. I think that his desire to go outside will be more rewarded than it has been under the previous couple regimes and the previous couple offensive coordinators, including, and I'm a big apologist for Ryan Grubb, including under Ryan Grubb. Like, I think that was a bad fit. And I think Kenneth Walker has a chance to really create a platform year for himself going into free agency under Kubiak.
I thought the biggest issue with Grubb last year is he just didn't settle on an identity. At the beginning, before the season started, the narrative sounded great to me, where he talked about like finding out what we're good at and then leaning into it, but also being multiple and being versatile. We'll run some inside outside zone, but we'll run gap power too. And that's fine. All teams are going to do that. Kubiak's going to run some gap power runs as well. He's going to sprinkle it in. He's just going to be predominantly outside zone. And so I think the offensive line was just too young and too inexperienced to be able to handle all of that being dumped on their plate. And that he should have probably leaned into one, because we saw success with both. And ironically, the best running game that we saw all year, most likely, was the one at Arizona. When Walker was hurt, and Charbonnet ran for 130, 140 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a couple of long runs, and they were running, they were pin and pull stuff, and LaMea and Lucas were getting out there and pulling, and that was more gap power based. And then the next week they just scrapped it. They just got rid of it completely, and we hardly saw it the rest of the season. I thought that was even more confusing for maybe that young offensive line and the running backs than they could handle, just because they just weren't experienced enough.
Do you think that I kind of think that Zach Charbonnet was actually a better fit? And I mean, I think that the production might say that also, but he was like actually a better fit for what the Seahawks were kind of good at last year. I don't know if they were really good at anything on the offensive line last year, but the thing they were best equipped for was probably more the gap power style running back or running game would be my guess. And I think he's a little better equipped for that. And I wonder if in his rookie year, it seemed like he was a fraction of the talent that Kenneth Walker was. And then last year they looked more equal. And I wonder if we'll see a shift back because of the scheme fit towards Walker this year. I think people take for granted that Charbonnet is just going to be able to step in and be as good as Walker because he was about as good as Walker last year. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with that.
I do think it's a great question. I was looking up the game logs from last year with Charbonnet because I wanted the numbers, but I think what best exemplifies what you just described is when you look at the New England game week 2, and then you looked at the Cardinals game the first Sunday in December, I believe. And that New England game, it was, they weren't expecting Walker to be out. I think if I recall, he was kind of a late scratch to that one. They were holding out hope up until game day he was going to be able to play. So they put Charbonnet in, but it was basically the Ken Walker game plan. And I remember it was a lot of like pistol stuff. It was a lot of like really deep handoffs. And that's just not Charbonnet's game. He isn't one of those guys, unlike Walker, who can get to full speed on his first or second step. Like, he needs a little bit of time to kind of get going. And so he didn't have a very productive game. And now I'm not going to take the time to look it up now, but he struggled, got hit in the backfield a lot. And then you look at that Arizona game and he looked like a borderline dominant full-time NFL starter because he got a chance to get his momentum going. He had guys running in front of him and pulling and creating some lanes. And I do think it'll be really fascinating to see which one of those guys takes to the new scheme better, because as we said, with Walker, it's a decision issue and an instinct issue. Can he see, the whole thing with wide zone is you kind of stretch it and the linemen aren't necessarily assigned to a defender as much as just block that guy and get him going with his momentum. And then the running back can decide which crease to take. You would think that would fit him because he can get up to speed so quickly. But can he make the right decision? Whereas Charbonnet, I think, he played, I think Chip Kelly ran quite a bit of wide zone at UCLA. So he's familiar with that scheme. And he seems like a guy that could be a little bit more patient, and that patience might really pay off for him in that scheme.
One of the things that I'm kind of curious about, and I know it's the most exciting to talk about 2025, but I've heard you talk a little bit about this also, which is Clint Kubiak isn't having his doors beaten down to become a head coach. And he probably won't and I think you've said this, but unless the Seahawks offense becomes a dominant offense, he's kind of, Clint Kubiak is a known quantity in the NFL. And it feels to me, and I said this as a pejorative at the time, and I kind of mean it as a positive right now. It feels a little Darrell Bevell-ish to me having him here. Yeah. But the thing about Bevell that I think I think Bevell was extremely underappreciated in Seattle, like point blank period. But one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is because he was here for 6 or 7 years, he got to establish the kind of player he wants and bring in the kind of player he wants. And now, I mean, a couple of years ago, we were talking about Ben Johnson being the longest tenured, last season, the longest tenured offensive coordinator was 3 years. And that's not even a rookie contract anymore. So those guys, they're never going to establish their identity in 2 years in a setting, And I think it will be interesting to see how that takes shape. And yeah, I think next year, if Charbonnet's a better decision maker and Walker's a better athlete, it's possible that those two things offset and they're about equal. But I would always bet on the better athlete at the running back position. I'm almost always going to bet on the better athlete.
Yeah, and Walker's just so quick and sudden. Like that burst is undeniable, and his change of direction it makes me lament even more that Thomas Rawls had the ankle injury he did, and that it changed him so much, because I don't think people appreciate how good he looked like he was going to be, the path he was going to be on as a rookie. If you recall the game at Cincinnati when Lynch was hurt, and I think it was like 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a couple long runs, and that guy could cut full speed on a dime and get like 45 degrees. Ken Walker has that kind of ability, and so. The frustrating thing has been the injuries, and it hasn't been ankles. It's been like ab stuff and core and things like that. So hopefully he can put that together. Let me throw some numbers by you, because I just kind of looked at this as a reference and see if you agree. And you already kind of touched on this with a number that you threw out, so I think you will. But as his ceiling, if he were to play 17 games, what if I told you he went for 1,400 yards rushing, caught 52 balls. He caught 46 last year. He's caught more every season. For 517 more and 20 total touchdowns. Could you see that being, now the touchdowns that's high, and touchdowns can be volatile, obviously. But can you see that being a realistic ceiling if he plays 17 games?
Yeah, I really can.
That's what Jahmyr Gibbs did last year.
Yeah, that's fair. Real quickly, I want to say Thomas Rawls, the game you're talking about, I checked it just to be sure. That was my wedding day.
Really?
And we were watching that game on an iPad. It was so funny because they lost that game to Cincinnati. And in like my memory, I've got a lot of memories that have overshadowed that in the day, but my memory is it was like in disappointing fashion. And I remember like coming out to the ceremony kind of sad that the Seahawks had lost, which I don't think my wife was very happy about. Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely think that a thing about the Lions that people like, because they have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jared Goff is such a storyline there, and Ben Johnson is such a storyline there. They run the ball. They run the ball a lot.
Yeah. And
so, I think like Jahmyr Gibbs getting that amount of carries and then also having another guy that's getting a ton of carries in Montgomery that's a real testament to how often they are running the ball. They're running the hell out of the ball.
I think that's the blueprint too, right? Charbonnet can be that kind of physical runner. He's much bigger. I think Martinez projects as that guy as well in the future, and we'll see where McIntosh fits in. But yeah, just while you were answering that one, I went back and pulled up the game log. So just to kind of tie up my previous point, at New England, 14 carries, 38 yards, 2.7 yards per carry. It just seemed like he was running in quicksand, like they were handing the ball to him so deep in the backfield. He just couldn't get anything going. And then that Arizona game. At Arizona, I'm looking at the wrong one here. Yeah, 22 carries, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 catches for 59 yards too. Just to add to that, like that was a heck of a game.
Do you think I will say of Damian Martinez, this is not a commentary on him, but just maybe my taste in running backs. I was hoping for a guy, the DJ Giddens kid that got drafted by Indianapolis, or Brashard Smith was a guy I had my eye on a lot, especially and I had a Tyrone Tracy last year was a guy that I really loved. These they're converted receivers. All of them, the guys I'm talking about, are converted receivers.
Was a guy that I know they had him in for a 30 visit. The Rams took him in the 4th round. He was a guy that I really liked and thought would have fit that kind of that similar mold too. Yeah,
I thought that would be like maybe a more I think Martinez has a chance to really step into either the Charbonnet or Walker role next year, depending on how the year shakes out, and if they decide to keep only one of those guys going into next year, which seems like the most likely and most intelligent decision is to not like not expect both those guys to be paid well into the future. I know Charbonnet's got another year before he's a free agent.
Let's get into that. Let's say Ken Walker has that a Jahmyr Gibbs year, like I just laid out, 1,400 yards rushing, 600 yards receiving, 10, 15 touchdowns, even if you want to be a little bit more realistic, because 20's crazy what a year that was. Like, I'm kind of with you. Like, does that kind of paint them into a corner and make a what shouldn't be that difficult of a decision difficult? Like, maybe it wouldn't be that difficult if Pete was still here, right? He'd just be like, pay him, right? Pay him, pay a good run. Or does you set yourself up, and obviously a lot of this can do what they look like and a program. Is that a case? Guy, because it wouldn't make sense to someone $9-10 million AAV when you get the talent.
I mean, so you broke up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it, which is, yeah, I'm terrified of finding out that John Schneider has had more influence on paying running backs than Pete Carroll had. Because, I mean,
he didn't take the second round.
Say it again. Sorry.
He didn't take one in the second round here, at least.
Yeah, that's fair. They didn't. They waited until the 7th round to take one. Yeah, I mean, I will say I will be pretty disappointed if they give Kenneth Walker a big contract, and it's nothing against Kenneth Walker. I think he's as good of a prospect as you could hope for at that position. I just don't think. I know the league is shifting to the running game becoming more important, and teams are paying running backs more. I would hate to see the Seahawks back on the leading edge of paying running backs. I think that's a thing that's plagued them over the years. And I also, by the way, I mean, I love Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch is one of the most fun players and most accomplished players in Seahawks history. And I just they never had him on a deal that I felt was prohibitive. And is this you're showing me the tattoo? Yeah, I mean, I love Lynch, but I was like, growing up, I was a huge Chris Warren fan. I loved running backs.
There you go.
And then you start to see these guys that are, like under Clint Kubiak's dad, Gary Kubiak, and Mike Shanahan, that Denver Broncos team that it was just like plug whoever in, pull guys off the street. Mike Anderson's playing fullback. Let's give him 30 carries and watch him run for 180 yards.
It's a bench negotiation. That 1 year that he kind of held out and was pushing for more money. Other guys, it's not all that dissimilar where we are today. There's a lot of guys on key deals that are up for extensions, could be extended this year or next. Seahawks are in great cap position, better cap position than they've been in both this year and next year. But still, if you decide to pay a running back $1 million a year, that can make things a little tough. And it'll be fascinating to see how they handle it. This is going to be one of those first big storylines to see how things are handled differently without Pete here, who just went and drafted a running back with the 6th pick overall, which drives analytic guys crazy, positional value and such. But let's take the group as a whole. I put this together just to recap. We've kind of touched on them all but just you look at together and some of this production for Helani and Martinez, their college numbers, right? But Walker, obviously, last year or total career 25 yards, 4.2 yards per carry. That's the same that Zach Charbonnet is averaging in his career at 4.2 per carry. Kenny McIntosh, we didn't get to see what he until the last 5 last year, but he had 5.5 yards per carry under an unbelittled offensive line. And then George Helani, Martinez, these college numbers, but wildly productive players. Martinez in particular, that 6.2 yards per carry average you see last year alone, he averaged 4 yards per carry after contact. Their total combined cap hit is less than $8 million. And that's why I posed the question. Like I asked you this earlier today, maybe check out some other depth charts around the league, but with the parameters that I set, like, you talk about San Francisco, you could say, okay. And if some people are watching, probably thinking, I like their running back room better because the guy at the top. Well, he's making huge money, massive money. My point of discussion here is there a better young running back room in the league when you take production, upside, and cap hit all into account.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find one that's better. I mean, I think there's guys where you could argue the top two are equally good
Sure.
and cheap this year, like Bucky Irving, Rashad White in Tampa Bay is a tough. That's a tough room to beat. I even think. I mean, I like Isaac Orendo quite a bit. And I like Jordan James, the Oregon kid they drafted a fair amount. But no, I think your point is well taken. And I think that the Seahawks, the fourth guy on their depth chart, is going to compete with the fourth guy on anyone's depth chart, and the fourth guy on their depth chart is going to be able to challenge for a starting spot in 2026. Whoever that ends up being, I think will be able to challenge for a starting spot in 2026.
I agree. And I tried really hard. I looked at every single other depth chart. I didn't, I wanted to, this was my assertion, just kind of, a lot of times these ideas for shows just kind of come to me in the morning or whatever. I'm drinking coffee or halfway asleep or whatever. And then I go research them and my initial assertion was wrong. And I tried to disprove, the question of, is this young room in the league? Like to your point, like the Jets having Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, like that's a pretty cool 1-2 punch, right? But Isaiah Davis is their third guy. Like that's not. He's going to be a borderline practice squad journeyman guy. Rams have it, and these guys swing close because they're right. Kyron Williams, he's healthy. Corum didn't. But we've seen the upside. Quite a ton, who I mentioned earlier, really draft. So that's a solid all on rookie deals. New England was what I toyed with, but because they added Travion to that group with Antonio and Ramondre Stevenson, what those two guys did to us last year. But Stevenson and Gibson alone account for $10 million on the cap. That eclipses the 5 Seahawks have right now. The room that I came up with close, but it's all in projection, is clean. Like Davis drafted 2 this year. This really good class, right? Quinshon Judkins in the second round, Dylan Sampson in the fourth, from 4, who's combined for 1,400 rushing yards the last 2, averaging 4.5 per carry, and then Pierre Strong, who flashes of, but he's never rushed for over 70 yards in a game. The cheap in there. If we had this discussion a year from now, they could be in the, especially Walker room. It's kind of. Are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to catch it, but it's like every 6th word I get. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Let me. I don't know how. If you're doing the multicam, okay. I don't know if you said these, but I think one room that's interesting to me. I certainly don't think that it competes with the Seahawks room. I think Amarion Hampton and Najee Harris are going to be interesting as a 1-2 punch, and then Raheem Sanders, he's an undrafted free agent in Los Angeles, this might be the first time I've ever not called them the San Diego Chargers. By the way, I caught myself in this moment. Yeah, that's an interesting group, but like on the depth chart I'm looking at, they have Sanders as their 6th running back. I think his upside's higher than some of the other guys on this list, but yeah, I certainly I think what you're saying is legitimate.
It's funny when you look ahead to the season that the 2 biggest storylines when it comes to that position is going to be, how can Walker stay healthy, and if he is, how good can he be? Like, could he put together the kind of season that we sort of laid out there, similar to what Jamar Gibbs did? But also at the same time, like running concurrently with that storyline is, can 1 or 2 of the other guys like insert themselves into their plans in the future and be good enough to make that decision a little more clear cut for them when the season comes to an end?
Yeah, I think one thing about McIntosh, and the graphic you had was I didn't even realize that his cap number was that high, by the way. It's really a $2.7 million cap number. Because
that's Walker. Yeah.
No, so the one below.
Oh, no. Oh, thanks for catching me. That is that's a typo.
Oh, thank God. I was going to say that's like the end of Kenny McIntosh in Seattle, if that's the case. Because
No. Their total cap hit combined $7.4 million. So let me just look that up. Go ahead and finish your thought
Sure.
there, and then and I'll confirm that.
Yeah.
Because,
So, I mean, if that was
comment.
McIntosh's cap number, I think that's like an obvious, he's an obvious casualty. And especially, by the way, one thing I will say, the Seahawks cap space is in a good spot this year and it's in a good spot next year. But with rollover cap, I think it really matters what you do this year. That can matter 3 years from now, because that's cap space that you might actually you might spend it 3 years from now. Yeah. And I do think like having a position that should be valued the way that the Seahawks are presently paying it, that is valuable. Like I do think that the Seahawks, if you factor in what you're saying, which is the amount invested into these guys, and you can criticize the Seahawks for using 2 second-round picks in consecutive years on Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and I did, and I would, and I don't feel bad about it. But if you consider all in what they have invested into these guys, I think you're probably right. One other room that it's interesting that I don't know if you said over that period, but the Giants room, because I like Tyrone Tracy so much, and Cam Scatabo is going to be interesting behind Singletary and Tracy, as that's still only 3 deep, though. To your point, that's still only 3 deep.
Right. It's $1 million for McIntosh. That was a copy and paste error. So
no worries. $1 million, you said.
When I post this, I'll throw something over the top of it.
Okay. Right on.
I won't edit it all out together. Mistakes are made, but yeah, that's where we're going to go with that. I think it's so much has been said about the offensive line this offseason, but and then when the move was made to trade Geno and sign Sam, the hot discussion there for a couple of weeks was, can we keep him upright? Like pass protection. Sure. Pass protection. But I think this may go further in determining how successful this offense can be this year, is how good the running game can be. Can it consistently be a factor and take pressure off the passing game? And we saw Kubiak do it in New Orleans last year. And, Schneider keeps referring to this, keeps going back and talking about it. And it's a valid point. They were ravaged injuries on the offensive line there. But even before that, they had certain guys. They had Trevor Penning on the verge of being a bust, him to the right side. They were starting a rookie at left tackle, and there was some question about whether he could hold up at left tackle. They had, really good center and guard in McCoy and Ruiz, but those guys, had health issues themselves. And then they're playing Lucas Patrick at left guard. Like there were question marks to begin the season, and then they all got hurt. And even with Alvin Kamara getting beat up, like they were able to run the football. And I think even more so than all the focus is going to be on the quarterback, right? How good is Sam Darnold? Can he replicate what he did last year? Are they going to use Jalen Milroe in certain situations? But can they run the football? Like Pete would be proud of us for talking about this. But can they run the football is probably going to be the biggest determining factor in how successful that offense is.
Yeah, and I do think there's been a bit of an overcorrection on the kind of resistance to Pete Carroll and resistance to overinvesting in running backs, is this idea that the running game itself isn't important. And I think that's completely incorrect. The running game is extremely important. In fact, it's probably the thing that sets the pace and is the most important. The question is should the investment in the running game go to offensive linemen or should it go to running backs? And I think that the league is even still correcting towards offensive line and maybe pulling it back towards running backs a little bit, but for years has been reallocating that money towards offensive linemen, I think correctly. And I think this discussion's really good because we're going to see the Seahawks if the Seahawks don't have a better running game this year, that's a failure of the Kubiak hire, I think.
Yeah. So many things. It has to be better. I would even say if we're ranking storylines, and I'm probably just riffing on a future episode standalone idea as I speak. If we're ranking, the priorities of which position groups have to perform, I think I'd put running game performance ahead of how good is Sam Darnold. I really do. I think that's going to go farther in telling us what this team's going to do. Yeah.
And I could really easily see Sam Darnold being Jared Goff. The parallels are pretty strong, I think, and that would make a ton of sense to me for him to become a Jared Goff type. And then hopefully Jalen, they've never really been able to develop another quarterback to challenge Jared Goff since Goff's been there. But hopefully Milroe can be that guy. But if he's not, having Jared Goff for the next 7 years wouldn't be too bad.
It's very timely of you, and I'm glad you brought up the Goff name because, there are some fans who just won't accept that players can get better or change, and that standard seems to be unfairly applied to the quarterback position more so than any other. But Goff's a great example of that, especially in light of the fact that we've had this watching tape discussion this week in how it relates to Caleb Williams and his first year in Chicago. And I don't know if you saw Dan Orlovsky's comments. Some of the stuff he did this week, but he was actually hired by Sean McVay his last year in the league. He had been in the league for 11 or 12 years, and McVay called him up his first year with the Rams, and he said, "Hey, we're going to bring you in as the third quarterback. You're not really going to be on the roster, but we want to sign you as a player. But all I want you to do is teach Jared Goff how to prepare and how to watch tape," because he had no idea. And so, you look at the player he's become, and now on his third big contract, and so for anyone saying, well, what happened in Minnesota last year was a fluke for Sam Darnold, just as people were saying that about Geno 3 years ago. Players get better and players develop and players learn new skills. Kirk Cousins last year on the Rich Eisen show said he didn't know how to read defenses until his fourth or fifth year in the league, like really know. And so, I think that's a great point. And Goff, maybe Goff for 20 years will be the poster child for like the guy that was counted out, but turned his career around through just hard work and learning and getting better. I mean, what a concept. Like we improved.
There's a couple other of those guys though. I mean, Baker Mayfield did it.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a couple more. Maybe those are the only two. Maybe I thought there was more. I was going to come up with more in my mind, and those were the only two. But I mean, maybe we'll see Justin Fields do it. Like there's guys with a ton of talent who just haven't found success yet.
Well, and a lot of times those guys just aren't given that next opportunity. So Fields is a great pull there. Because, I haven't been the biggest proponent of his, but there was a team out there willing to give him a chance to the point that they said, hey, we're not going to draft a guy high. We're going to, we don't want you to feel threatened. We're going to give you a shot at this thing. Maybe he is the next guy.
And they gave him $20 million. I love Justin Fields. And I was like, wow, that's good for him.
Up to 30. Yeah. I was shocked by it too. Yeah. Hey, before I let you go, one last thing. I was going to save this for my outro that I record after we say goodbye, but you're such a big baseball guy and a Mariner fan. And as you pointed out when we started talking here before I hit record, even more so really than Seahawks, the announcement today that we're going to start, I guess we're going to take the next step in expanding the Forever Network. Maybe that'll be a thing someday. But Mariners Forever is going to debut Friday with my co-host Michael Thompson, used to write for Soto Mojo. I haven't been able to talk about the Mariners in a podcast form for 3 years for various reasons, been focusing on the Seahawks. But I'm excited to announce that, and I'm excited to have you back on. We'll get to talk some baseball soon, too.
Hell yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah. What do you let's do this. A little preview there, a little bonus preview. How do you feel about your first place Mariners at the moment?
Man, I mean, I was alongside everybody else, like ready to burn it down from the top down. And, I think it's the one thing I said during the offseason was if they're finally committing to a rebuild and they're going to like not trade away these prospects, this would have been the offseason to do it. And, but to imagine that the coaching staff would turn Jorge Polanco from a guy who was like scuffling to stay on a major league roster to one of the best hitters in baseball and to, somehow Cal Raleigh keeps getting better and JP Crawford turned it around. And, even Julio shows some real positive signs that I don't think they've necessarily borne out in production yet, but there's like real positive indicators. Like, man, you got to feel great about it. I was his biggest, and I love Edgar Martinez. Like anybody does. There's no reason to not like Edgar Martinez, but
sure.
I was a skeptic, and they've done nothing. I keep getting proven wrong by this coaching staff. It seems like
it might be the most Mariner thing ever. That I'm with you. Like I'm an optimist, and people that watch my content know that I tend to lean towards the positive. And even a couple off seasons. Not that, I mean, I've been accused of being an apologist for Mariners ownership, but my perspective has always been like, look, these are restrictions that the general man has been, strapped with. What he can only do the best with what ownership gives him to do.
Well, it's just me, folks, and I think what happened is some Mariners fans hacked into Dan's account, and they have they're destroying his life. They have him tied up to his computer chair. I've orchestrated this myself, actually. This is me and Jerry DePoto. We got together and we hatched this plan to ruin Dan's life, to tie him down, and to really just wreck his life. And no, I don't know. If you're listening to this still, Dan's having internet issues. I don't know if he's never gonna include this for sure. I will be at the Beat Drop Kitchen and Events Center in Lacey, Washington, this Saturday. As you're listening to this, if you listen to it as it comes out, and I will be at Tacoma Comedy Club June 22nd headlining. I will be at Evergreen State Brewing on June 13th. What else? Opening for Joe List at Tacoma Comedy Club June 12th. My favorite comic in the whole world. Maybe Dan will come back. Maybe he won't. I don't know.
Big apologies to the Wi-Fi issues there at the end. Kudos to Casey for ad-libbing and carrying it through. That's why I faded it out there at the end, though. Been here in the new place for 2.5 weeks. Haven't even had a scare when it comes to Wi-Fi. Like, it has been as solid can get. Today, for some reason, for the last 5-6 hours, I've been struggling with it all day. So maybe they're just working on something, some maintenance or whatever. I tried all the Tech 101 stuff I know how to do, but apologize for that. I think he was able to finish his last thought there. So appreciate Casey coming on. Really excited about the new channel, Mariners Forever. Head on over to that YouTube channel. If you want a direct link, that'll be down in the description, and subscribe to the channel so you can catch our first episode on Friday. Michael Thompson and I just kind of catching up on the season so far, and sort of how we got to this point and what comes next for the Mariners as we move forward. So thank you for supporting that as well. Be one of the first to subscribe over there. At Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. And then do all the things here as well. Subscribe to the channel and check the links down below if you want to donate directly. Until tomorrow, I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Forever and always. Go Hawks.